all for attending the 13th ESSA Task Force meeting. If you look at our agendas and our folders, you'll see that the majority of this meeting will be conducted by OSSE, giving us updates on, Donna and Justin. And Chloe, she's not here, right?
No.
Okay. Giving us updates on, what are y'all doing? The forefront?
A little bit of that, a little bit of everything. So we're going to do ESSA implementation. We're going to talk about teacher data.
Okay. So you have the floor.
Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sure. Pass everything.
Pass it. You want me to pass those around?
Okay. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. Okay.
So consistent with what we said in our ESSA state plan about updating the State Board of Education on the implementation of the accountability system, we wanted to make sure that we provided you with a lot of the same information that we provided them. So a lot of this is going to be things you've seen, but making sure, because people sometimes drop in and out and miss an episode, why you would want to miss an episode of this great show. We want to make sure that everyone's operating on the same sort of level of information. So if it's redundant, bear with us, but if it's new, tune in. So we did want to remind you of our commitments in the ESSA state plan. We're going to breeze through where we are with report card development, since I know you get your fair dose of that every month. But then there's also some things around some process and operational things that we want to just make sure that you're aware of. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our future commitments as it pertains to access to opportunities, climate surveys, and high school growth, and some of the next steps that we will take during the fall on these particular topics. And then we also want to fulfill another commitment that we made to the state board through the report card resolution on thinking about uses and collection of teacher data. So we'll preview some of that work and then do a little facilitated activity to talk about teacher data with TNTP.
Ready?
So these were our commitments to the state board. We would provide updates to the public and the state board on progress on amending the accountability system 3 times a year. We would co-host a roundtable before December 2018, and we would bring substantive changes to the state board for approval. There's an entire process that's outlined in the ESSA state plan about how we would change the accountability system in the future around substantive changes to the system. Then we also made specific accountability commitments in these areas. So one, access to opportunities. We've talked about this several times around piloting in this school year for, and then using informal accountability results later on. We discussed the use of climate surveys, so providing some additional optional opportunities for LEAs in schools to use school climate surveys and to think about its future use in the accountability framework. We made a commitment around high school growth, about bringing a proposal at the end of this school year about the incorporation of high school growth. As you'll recall, there is not a high school growth measure in our STAR framework for high school grade levels. And then lastly, through this resolution, when we approved the report card content, we said that we would support further inquiry into teacher data to inform future report cards by collaborating with the ESSA task force and other education stakeholders to understand the community's data or data needs around teacher information. So we'll work with you all on that tonight. We'll be in that work tonight. So I'm going to punt off to Donna.
Thank
Who
you.
leads our accountability work office.
Hello, everyone. For those that I don't know or haven't met before, I'm Donna Johnson, Director of Accountability with OSSE. I want to give you just a quick update on the development of our DC school report card. So we did more of an update last month, but wanted to update just a couple of things for you. Last month we talked about the report card engagement cycle and brought you up to speed on where we are currently. Looking at what our focus has been since August is really looking towards the launch and then what the next steps look like. So that's really the engagement focus of making sure that people are aware of, engaged, understanding all of the types of uses and the ways in which they can engage with the data on the report card, and then thinking about how we can continue to build on that moving forward. So kind of looking at what our timeline looks like between now and December, we're really in that informed phase. where we're talking to people and making sure they're aware of what is to come in December. And then from December and beyond, we'll be looking at that launch and adoption phase in terms of adopting its use into your regular planning, into your discussions, into your engagement with others. And that's really what we mean in terms of that adoption phase, is adopting it into use. And how do we use it on a regular basis to help drive things forward. A couple of the outlines we talked about last month as well. We talked about resources and tools. Our OSSE website is live now, so we have the ossedc.gov/DC school report card. On that site, you'll see some background around how the report card was built, so some of the parent and community engagement that helped inform the components of the report card, as well as the language and the layout of the report card. And then you'll see in the Learn section where we're starting to add more resources. Right now, we have 3 resources linked there. We have the DC School Report Card at a glance, which is the one-pager that we handed out last month. We've also added the STAR framework at a glance, which you have in front of you. So it's that colorful one-page front and back that gives just a very high-level overview of the school transparency and reporting framework, which we refer to as the STAR framework. And then we also have the technical guide linked there as well. And then some additional resources, as you can see, that are coming soon. So as things are developed and finalized, we'll be adding those to the website. Just a couple little visual images. As we said last time, there are constant iterations as the report card is getting closer and closer to launch. We are getting more of the visual components actually created. So you've got some mock-ups at this point of what the mapping tool will look like. Because as you remember, the report card is not just a printable piece of paper, it's actually a dynamic website. So this is an interactive website tool which will allow you to explore our DC schools in a variety of ways. You can explore them at the individual report card level and look at individual schools. You can also look at them on a mapping tool. You can then pull down and filter based on the types of programs that you're interested in or things that you want to learn about from a school, and you'll be able to sort them on the map. The other thing that you can do is you can actually identify and compare 3 different schools side by side at once based on the information that parents and community members voted were in their top 5 most requested items. Those are all listed on the compare tool. So you'll be able to see those items based on the feedback that we did in the first two engagement cycles. Those things that came out the highest repeatedly over and over again were placed onto the compare menu. So you'll be able to see those things side by side when you select up to 3 schools. And these are all, if you look at this and you have a printout of it, those are not real schools, those are not real placements, so we have not suddenly started locating schools on the mall. There's none in the reflecting pond, so
We're
it's just
exploring those options at DCPS, however.
Okay, great.
Outdoor education.
Reflecting pond.
Yeah, we want to.
Partnering with the Smithsonian.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I think it goes without saying, but just in case people are looking and they don't get to necessarily hear the narrative, just remember, this is a mock-up, not real. School names, not real. It's all mock-up data. This is just an overview of half of a school profile page. So you can see some of the information. When you click on a school's report card, you'll be able to see a variety of pieces of information, over 150 data pieces on a school's report card. So you'll be able to compare these same elements for every public school across DC, as long as they have those elements to populate these things. Some of the elements do not pertain to certain schools, such as high school metrics don't pertain to elementary schools, things of that sort. But you'll be able to see different information such as the parent organization information, student population, a unique message from the school. There's a page for the STAR framework information, a page for academic performance, and a page for school environment. Below that, where we were just looking, there's also the information about the school programs, and then some open narrative that the schools have provided regarding their extracurricular activities, some information from their health profile that's collected every year around average physical activity time, and then some logistics about the school. And that's all on just the front page, what we're referring to as the school's profile page of their report card. As you dig in deeper, on those tabs across the top, you'll be able to look at academic performance and school environment, so those two areas. And this is what we call the summary page of those domains. And then you'll be able to click in for the more information on each one of those and look into detailed data pieces and information about that school's performance in that area. So these are stylized pages that had not yet been released. And then digging a little further, looking at what does the STAR framework page look like. So if you were to look at a school STAR framework page, you'd click on that second tab from the top, and you'd be able to see, for example, this model is a middle school. You'll be able to see the STAR rating, the score, and then it goes down pretty long, and you can kind of see a little bit there. It's kind of hard to see, but you'll be able to explore in a couple different ways. You'll be able to explore the school by school type, so if it's a middle school, high school, elementary school, or if it's a combination of grade spans, you'll be able to explore by grade span. You'll also be able to look at it by metric, and then click on the little blue bar underneath of it to see all of the student groups' performance underneath that individual metric. If you'd rather explore the opposite direction and look at it by student group, you'll be able to click on the student group and then click on the little blue box underneath of that and see each one of the metrics under that student group. And then if you click on any of those metrics, you'll be able to see the very last box there is just an example of what a metric bar will look like. And it's a detailed performance by metric, and that will be different by student group. You'll be able to see what the floor was for that metric, what the target was. You'll be able to see where the school was performing, and for many of the metrics, you'll also be able to see a citywide average underneath of that. A couple updates on our school transparency and reporting framework, which we refer to as the STAR framework. We gave an update last week to the state board on just kind of updating where we were with ESSA implementation. We wanted to share some of that information with all of you as well. So just a background, and some of you are very well familiar with this in terms of how the STAR implementation in terms of methodology. We engaged with LEAs to develop details and then really come to finalization of the methodologies and the rules of calculation that were used for those metrics between February and July. We had roughly about 12 meetings, and then we've published the technical guide that was created and informed as a result of those meetings there on the website. It's also on the website that I linked before. As I said, you have the STAR at a glance. That is the one-pager about the STAR framework. It is designed for someone who really does not have a in-depth understanding or technical understanding of the accountability system. It's a first glance, just like its title is. It tells you a little bit about what's in the framework, breaks it down based on elementary, middle, or high school, tells you how many points are in each of those domains, and then on the back, talks about how a STAR score is calculated in very high-level terms. So it talks about how it uses the all students, so the performance of all students across all metrics based on citywide performance, and then how it looks at individual student groups, including students with disabilities, at-risk students, English learners, and each one of our race and ethnicity groups, and comparing those to performance across those same student groups across the city. And then everything is totaled together to create a STAR score. That score is converted into a 0 to 100 number, which then equates into a rating, 1 to 5 stars, 5 being highest rating. A little bit about additional outreach. We have been reaching out and doing some sessions with educators, with principals, data managers, other school personnel to make sure that they understand the metrics, they're engaged and know where the resources are. We'll be doing more of that as we lead up to launch. And then we're also developing some specific resources targeted for educators, including some webinars that will be developed before launch, a very specific set of FAQs that will be targeted towards educators, some of the questions that we anticipate they'll have, as well as some of the questions that they'll get. And then some additional resources that will help school leaders as well in terms of providing this information and helping explain this information to their community and their educators. a little bit last time about the different ways in which we were increasing the checks that we were making on data collection, the validation, and then adding in an additional confirmation phase. So the last time I was talking to you, we were in that first phase of what we're calling metric calculation confirmation. So we broke up the elements on the report card, which include the elements in the STAR framework, into two different phases. The first phase had about 60% of the metrics that were on the report card in the STAR framework, and then the second half has about the other 40%. So the first half was a bit more labor intensive in terms of having all of that profile information and directory information about schools. That took place in September. We're getting ready to start our second phase, which is going between October 15th and then it ends on November 1st. A little bit about future updates. So a couple months ago, we talked about access to opportunities and gave a very high-level overview around what that could look like moving forward. So a recap of our commitment. Our commitment in our ESSA plan to the state board, we committed to create a measure and then pilot that in some way in this school year, 18-19, and then to consider its use for formal accountability results in 19-20 school year and beyond. So one of the things that we'll be doing as soon as we are finished with all of our metric calculation is engaging LEAs and community stakeholders again to start talking about how are we going to collect some of this data. And I'm going to go over an outline of the types of information that we're going to be looking at, and then doing some research and analysis of how the data can be analyzed and created into a metric. A couple of the things I just wanted to reiterate, I know we've shown this slide before, but I think it's important when we start thinking about bringing and developing new metrics, are some of the data considerations. Because sometimes we think of some really great things that we can collect data on, but they don't always meet the statutory requirements or some of the other data considerations that we have to think about when creating metrics. So first and foremost, we must be able to disaggregate the data at the student group level. That means breaking it down into at-risk students, students with disabilities, each race, ethnicity, and any of the other student groups, including homeless, children in foster care, military connected youth, all of those different student groups that we have to report things on under ESSA are things that we must be able to break this information down into.
For pre-K, we have the class observation system. Is that reported down at the subgroup level?
Yeah, so that's actually outlined in we are reporting it at the subgroup level. It is a class observation. So the student group score is the same for the student groups that are represented in that score. If a school does not have a minimum threshold for that student group, then they do not receive a class score. Because it's based on a class level observation, it's distributed in the same fashion, but a subgroup is not represented if they don't meet the minimum N size.
You attribute the full class to the subgroup?
Yes.
Okay. So if there were 20 students in the classroom and 9 of them were in a particular subgroup, there would not be a score for that subgroup.
Correct.
There'll be a different score.
In that school. Right.
They get a score.
Right.
It's just everyone gets 4.
But if you only had 9 students of a certain student group.
Okay, I think I was just
Yeah.
trying to get to the point that, like, if the metric itself includes students somehow, then we can report that we can check this.
Class level.
Okay, great.
We also make sure that it allows for meaningful differentiation so that we're not seeing every score all in the same area. There needs to be some meaningful differentiation between that metric in order for it to meet the ESSA requirements. And then I won't read through all of them, but one of the other things we really want to take into consideration is the administrative burden around collecting that data and trying to utilize existing data or easily accessible and collected data. So not trying to add an additional data collection. If there's data that's already there and simply could be collected in a different way, that's something that we could explore. But we certainly wouldn't at this point in time want to implement a whole new initiative, collect that data, and then ask for it back. We want to look for something that was there that meets this criteria and then build upon that. So a little bit about the access to opportunities metric, and this was really a metric that came about from the state board in asking for a metric that addressed the equitable access and engagement of students in a well-rounded educational system, making sure that they had opportunities to engage in that and that they were engaging in a well-rounded educational system. So we've listed a few of the areas that we would like to explore collecting data around this metric, including information around arts and music education, science education, social studies and civic education, technology learning, technology access and technology education, health and physical education, world language programs, access to advanced coursework, post-secondary readiness programs, and career training, CTE, work-based learning experiences. That is not considered to be an exhaustive list, but it's the list that we put down as a starting place. So definitely something that we will start with this list when engaging with LEAs and stakeholders. Certainly does not mean that we are opposed to adding other areas that meet this criteria to this metric. And we look forward to bringing additional information to you as we develop this. So one of the next steps, as you can see here, is we're going to be reviewing. There are a couple other states in the country that are working on developing a metric like this, as well as some other research groups that have been talking about ways that states and schools can capture this information. So we'll be looking into that research, bringing that together to inform our decision, working with our LEA data leads to look at the available data, and then think about what that burden on collecting that data looks like, and then try to maximize and use efficiencies within that system. Then we'll go through and we'll run some potential methodologies of how we could create business rules around such a metric. And then once we have some models, tested it, looked at how it looks like, we then bring it back and share more information with you around what that pilot looks like, and then do that at a future ESSA task force meeting and state board meeting. Yes, ma'am?
Are there other input-based metrics in the current framework?
Are there what?
Other input-based metrics in the current framework?
No, not.
Well, I mean, health and physical education and the number of minutes students are getting
Is
in
statutory.
PE. Yes, and that's
That's
already
on the
something that is
report card, but in
correct.
terms of the framework, no.
Yeah.
There are some of those on the report card, but not in the framework.
Right.
So this would be the first of
This
that
would be the first
nature,
of that nature.
potentially, if we go that route.
Yes.
Is OSSE looking at also outcome?
Yes, I
aspects
think
of
that's a
it,
very
or-
important thing to think about. So one of the things that, and I mentioned, other states are looking at developing a metric like this. Louisiana is one of those states. They are actually looking at measuring the quality of these programs in addition to access and engagement. So that would be a next step, a next iteration. Not something that we have the capacity to do at this point in time, but in terms of looking at outputs, definitely something that we could explore.
And is there like a national consortia of states that are trying to solve this?
No, not really a national consortia. It's more just a couple of states looking through ESSA plans and looking to see what states have done something similar to this, and then reaching out to see what did that measure really mean for their state. Kentucky is another one that I reached out to and talked with. Tennessee was looking at something similar, but it's not exactly the same. And so there's a couple others that may be exploring something like this in future iterations of their accountability system. And then there are some that have some components of what we're looking for, but maybe only for high school or only at elementary and middle. So it's not exactly the same, but definitely something we can learn from in the way in which they're building what they might call their college career readiness metric. Or like in Massachusetts, they have an arts and music metric that they've looked at. So some little aspects that you can look and see how they collected it, but it doesn't necessarily mirror word for word what we're looking to build. Yes, ma'am?
I know that they administered the insight survey to teachers. Is that something that is being looked at
For access to opportunities?
I think that's what it's, no, it's directional culture insight.
Oh, so I'm getting up to the climate surveys right now.
Okay.
I'm going with Justin.
All right. So we also did a commitment around school climate surveys. We've seen a lot of this material first, but I want to tell you about a new new product that we are delivering. So our commitment was we would begin an optional program with LEAs in schools interested in piloting a school survey, a school climate survey for possible future use of the accountability framework. So remember, school climate surveys is evolving space. One, there's a lot of questions about exactly what is it you're trying to measure. Climate means a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and there are lots of different instruments that try to address maybe discipline or address like teacher-officer interaction with students. Not a ton of instruments out there that do everything we want it to do, so what we're trying to do is get through, like, to inventory what we have, what it measures, and look at some of the administrative aspects of how you would do something like this at the state. And that was the commitment that we are making, to continue to monitor and evaluate the tools and results of each of these different tools starting at the end of the 17-18 school year. We also have a commitment with the law that we're bound to by the DC Council. So the Youth Suicide and School Climate Survey Amendment Act requires OSSE to implement a pilot program for collecting school climate data beginning in school year 16-17. So we finished the second year of this. We also are required to do an annual report on the administration of this survey. There's data in there. This is a good resource if you want to just sort of look at what a potential school climate survey looks like. And we get into some of the design aspects in there, and then also we present some state level findings around there, but they're not, you don't see a lot of differentiation, but all that information is there. Our 17-18 report is still waiting to be, go through the council system and get posted, but as soon as it gets posted, I will let John Paul and the state board know, and they can disseminate that to the state board as well. And then the act requires that OSSE provide the council with a plan to expand school climate surveys to all DC public schools for grades 6 through 12 in school year 2021. You've seen this slide as well. These are some of the different instruments that are being used. The report that I mentioned that we submit to the council, we use the NIJ Comprehensive School Safety Initiative Survey, and the survey is a national school climate survey, but it's a part of an initiative that we're doing with NIJ.
Justin?
Yes.
Sorry, we're having trouble hearing you on the phone.
Oh, sorry, I can come back. I'm not wondering.
Thank you.
So you can take a look at those. There's some hyperlinks there. You can look and get a feel of the different types of instruments out there. Again, this gives you a flavor of all of the different types of questions that people are trying to get at when they talk about school climate. Some of these are discipline related. Some of those are teacher interactions. Some of those are safety and security and student perceptions. So the school climate landscape is generally all over the place.
Next item that was on our commitment list was to look at and explore development of a high school growth metric. So this is the first year that we have had consortium growth level information at the high school level to be able to analyze. So what we promised to do and put into our ESSA plan was to bring a proposal by the end of the 18-19 school year that would lay out a plan for incorporating high school growth into the STAR framework. So what we are currently doing is reviewing and analyzing the consortium growth data elements, looking at some analysis of what that means based on our test administration, the way in which we test people from 8th grade through high school, and then look at the psychometric validity of those calculations. So kind of really fancy way of really thinking about digging into the data and determining if this is the most valid way of measuring growth, what that would mean for DC before bringing a proposal forward with data that we haven't explored, we haven't discussed what the methodologies would look like, and we haven't had the engagement of our LEAs, which is what we've done with every other metric in the STAR framework. So honoring that commitment is what we have proposed to do in our ESSA plan, and outlining here as well, is working on that during the 18-19 school year before we bring a proposal to the state board to consider the incorporation of high school growth into our STAR framework. Yes.
Has the decision been made around what the proposal would be to include it for the 2019?
No, that decision has not been made.
Okay, so it could be included next December or it could be delayed an additional year.
That
Yep.
still needs to have that review, that analysis, that discussion. That has not been made at all.
How does the changing size of the park consortium affect this metric or this conversation?
So in terms of our consortium level data, I mean, it depends on what tests we wanted to look at, what sample size we had for some of those tests and some of those progressions. That's something that we'll have to consider when we do that research. And next up is teacher data. So as we said at the very beginning, one of the commitments that OSSE made to the state board was to support the further inquiry of teacher data to make sure that that could inform future report cards. Currently, we have 3 teacher staffing data elements on the report card. One of them deals with experience. The other 2 deal with certification and in-field teachers, which is reported for DCPS teachers only. And then we also want to take into consideration feedback that we hear from stakeholders such as the ESSA task force and other stakeholders. Also mitigating that with the capacity to collect and present teacher data, and then have a little deeper question around what is the purpose for some of that data in terms of what question is it answering, and when we're looking at the data, what is it helping us drive towards in terms of improving educational opportunities for students. So we're done.
The third thing you said was being reported on, you said experience certification in the field for DCPS only, and what was the third?
It's teacher experience, which is for all schools. And then we have certified teachers and in-field.
Oh, that's separate.
Those are separate, yes. Yes.
Before we move on to TNTP, where is the report card going to live? Like, what is the URL? Is it learndc.org? Is it
It's
OSSE.dc.gov?
dcschoolreportcard.org.
DC School Report.
www.dcschoolreportcard.org.
Does that exist now?
Yes.
I didn't hear you, sorry, what?
Oh, does that exist now?
Yes. I think right now it doesn't have a splash page up, but you cannot put anything else on that site. Yes, that is our URL. And next up, we'd like to invite our presenters, there we go, to talk a little bit about the review that they have done and the work that they've done regarding teacher information and teacher data. However you would like.
Hi everyone, my name is Christine Reiner. I'm a partner at TNTP. I'm going to lead us through an activity in the next 45 minutes based on a project we've been working on here in the city. I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking at you. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then my hope is to break us up into small groups to do a little bit of a brainstorming exercise tonight. But first, a little bit of an introduction as to why I am here tonight. So late last spring, TNTP and Education Forward started, Education Forward engaged TNTP to start thinking about talent data across the city. And the impetus for this project was really twofold. The first was that there was some concern that LEAs were being overburdened with asks for their talent data throughout the year, and that was taking a lot of time. And simultaneously, we were also hearing across the city that agencies and organizations who make decisions in the education space didn't have access to really basic data points that they needed in order to be able to make the decisions. So a good example there is just how many teachers work in DC. Some people were saying it was hard to even find that data. And so these two things seemed in conflict to us, and we wanted to dig into what the talent data space actually looked like across the city. And when we say talent data, we really are talking much more broad than teacher level data. We're talking data around the talent workforce across DC. And so we really engaged in 3 phases to this work. This is actually not the most updated, but I'm gonna go with this anyway. We really engaged in 3 phases to this work. The first phase, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in the next 10 minutes, is where we really tried to do a talent data landscape. So we went to stakeholders across the city and tried to better understand what talent data is currently being collected, by whom, and how it's being used. The second phase of this work, which is why I'm really here tonight and what we're going to spend some time talking about, was to really get at what are the talent priorities and challenges across the city that everybody wants to tackle together, and what data is really needed in order to tackle those challenges. And is there a way that we can think as a city better about talking and sharing about talent data in order to tackle some of those priorities? So we're going to have a conversation around that phase of the work tonight. The last phase of the work that we'll be doing in the next few months is taking what we learned from that, going back to phase one, mapping it against the data that already exists, in order to come up with some recommendations that we can go back to these agencies across the city to be able to say, here are some ideas we have for some of the talent priorities you say you want to tackle, and how you can potentially go about doing that. So, what have we learned in phase one of the work? A few things. We have learned that, with a few exceptions, OSSE collects most of the talent data across the city. That includes things like teacher demographics, experience, vacancies, and we learned from the LEAs that we talked to that although they do get asked for data a lot, the burden isn't so much just with talent data. In fact, OSSE has made a lot of progress in the last few years to the point where they only really ask for talent data from LEAs once a year. And they've made a lot of progress with narrowing in on definitions of what that data is to make it easier for LEAs to submit data, which was reassuring to hear. We also heard that OSSE, and we also know that OSSE leads an initiative called the Staff and Data Collaborative. If LEAs choose to opt into the Staff and Data Collaborative in exchange for submitting their talent data, they actually get quarterly reports back on their talent data benchmarked against citywide data with recommendations for different talent issues such as smart retention, recruitment, performance evaluation. So LEAs are actually getting some of that citywide data benchmarked back against their own data if they opt into that Staff and Data Collaborative program. We did learn, however, that broadly speaking, agencies and funders and other stakeholders across the city have an appetite to better understand aggregate data in the city. And I'm not talking about teacher level data here specifically, I'm talking about big things. So demographics overall of teachers in the city, vacancies across the city, etc. And that data isn't currently shared publicly, at least most of it's not. Some of it can be found on federal databases, but it is hard to find, not in a great format to manipulate, and a lot of times is outdated. I'm going to skip ahead here. We also learned a little bit about the data that's being collected. So some challenges and constraints with the data set that currently exists. First, scope. So when we think about the data that's collected in DC, something that's important to keep in mind is that it only covers DC. So we hear questions about mobility issues, for example, of teachers who leave DC and go to Maryland or Virginia. The data that currently exists can't really answer that because it is DC specific. So there are some scope challenges. Coverage. So there are certain data points, such as compensation, for which LEAs opted to submit compensation to certain agencies, but it's only collected from a subset of LEAs, so it doesn't represent data from across the city. Comparability is another challenge with the data. So LEAs across Washington, D.C. don't use the same teacher evaluation system. So you're not going to be able to have an apples-to-apples comparison of evaluation data across the city. Privacy laws and agreements. This is a really important one. So a lot of the data that is collected is protected by privacy agreements that limit the level of teacher, school, LEA level data that can be shared. And finally, quality. And this really speaks to the fact that although there's been a lot of progress with defining very clearly what data needs to be submitted, that wasn't always the case, and so a lot of the data, historically especially, is messy. LEAs interpret it in different ways, and so the data that we have isn't, again, always comparable across LEAs. There are also just some considerations that have surfaced by talking to stakeholders in phase one of this work. So things just to keep in mind as we continue these conversations. One is that, again, we want to be respectful of the privacy laws and agreements that exist. Another is that we don't want to increase burden on LEAs at all when it comes to data collection, and that should be considered in these conversations. Another is that whatever is collected should be strategic and actionable, and we're going to talk about that in our conversation in a little bit. But where data is collected, the stakeholders we talked to really felt strongly that it be used for a strategic purpose to attack certain priorities that the city has in a positive and productive way. And then balancing all of this with the desire for data transparency as well, that we know exists. So I'm going to launch us into this conversation about phase 2 of our work. If you have more questions about what we found in phase 1, this really only scratches the surface, and I'm happy to talk more about the data trends that we saw in phase 1 of our work. You can find me afterwards, and I'm happy to connect at another time. But I really do want to have a discussion tonight and pick all of your brains about this phase 2 of the work. But before we do that, I just want to set some national context. So if you look at states across the country, most states are not just sharing public talent data without a purpose. Most aren't sharing it at all. But there are a few bright spots that we can look to as we have these types of conversations. So these are just 4 examples of states that we've pulled out that are doing something more with their talent data in terms of how they share it publicly. So Oregon, for example, has a priority around workforce diversity and equity. And so they publish a report that includes things like educator demographic data in order to shine light on their priority of workforce diversity. And then based on that, an advisory group gives recommendations to organizations and entities around the state on how they can help address that challenge. In Maryland, right next door, there is a report on staffing data in the state. So that report includes things like shortage areas. It includes information about teacher prep. It includes information about teacher demand and demographics and attrition. But that's all very much geared towards a priority of improving their teacher prep programs and informing LEA hiring. So again, I think in Tennessee and Louisiana, similar examples, but the important thing to call out here is that this is data sharing that is following a set of strategies or policies that a state hopes to address. All right, so with that being said, we're going to break off into smaller groups. There is some poster paper. I think we have 4 or 5 groups across the room, so we're going to count off in a minute. And what we're trying to get at in this brainstorm activity are a few things. We're going to start with 10 minutes of just brainstorming in your group of 4 or 5 people. What, in your mind, are the biggest talent priorities or challenges that DC faces? Just a brainstorm list and nothing else. After we do that, we're going to prioritize a little bit based on our brainstorm, and we're going to launch into a conversation of the types of data that we needed in order to inform those priorities, to answer questions we have about priorities, and finally, what we think would come out of sharing this type of data, so that we can have an idea and come back to you and others with recommendations of what we do in phase 3. Yeah.
A couple quick questions before
Sure.
we get to that. The data that you said, OSSE has a lot of the data.
Mm-hmm.
Is that aggregate level, like at the LEA and school level data, not necessarily teacher specific? And does DC have I think some of these states that are mentioned in this have like a teacher identifier, a unique identifier for teachers. Does DC have one?
DC does not have an identifier for teachers across the city. The data that OSSE collects is occasionally at the teacher level and occasionally not. It depends on the type of data. And it is to drive federal and local reporting requirements. So the ones that they collect are for reporting requirements. Right, okay. Approximately how many people do we have here? 20-ish?
Right.
All right, we're going to come up by groups, I think, and break up into groups that way. Can we start at that end of the table with 1, and we're just going to count off by quarters?
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2,
3,
4. 1, 2, 3.
4.
1.
Okay. We're going to go group 1 down here at that poster paper, group 2 over here, group 3 over here, and group 4 right here. And each group is going to have a facilitator. And again, this first 10 minutes is just going to be brainstorming priorities, talent priorities, and challenges that you see in the city. And you're 4.
Oh,
You're a 4. You're a 4. You're a 4. Yeah.
No idea.
That's 2, 3, 1,
Around on a broken tube. Great. Okay, so I am going to write down as well but again, we're doing priorities if you'd like to see. Anybody else cross organizations?
Math, science,
Specifically like teachers, like teacher quantity? Okay.
all right. Those are my
Specifically quality of it, quantity of it?
and then I guess we can kind of mental quality with the type as well. So in schools are mainly African Americans and low income, they're more based on testers. But rather, if you go to a school in Ward 3, they're more based on exploratory learning.
I'm going to say like equity of
my most frustrating, like this drives this. Right. My most frustrating thing is
So is this brainstorming about the challenges and priorities for education professional talent in DC in general, or is this specifically around data collection around the talent?
No, we're going to get to the data collection that we need. This is just around the challenges that you see around the talent force that we're
Beyond that, to me, that shows that
I mean, speaking from the school perspective, I mean, hiring quality teachers and candidates that provide equitable education for our students. Availability, hiring.
oh yeah, no, I already.
I read it. Honestly, I say you guys a lot of time and energy, money.
We knew that.
I do a 2-page email, but
We knew that.
it resonated.
We knew that going in. The data that you go back on.
Oh my God.
It's like.
I think you meant foreign language. Yeah.
That's like
Always.
doesn't need to be just teachers too. It could be any talent, it could be leaders, any other talent.
I mean, well, principal retention, I think that's maybe true.
Yeah.
And that could be someone who just up and leaves, or someone who needs to be removed.
I would say like around retention, like evaluation systems.
Challenge.
What about
Like I had no good options in this.
Arguing to me more harm than good.
Educational
You have to go.
Okay, so quality of teacher evaluation systems.
Attrition versus regret attachment.
That I have literally not
Could have been good teachers, I think they go from one, right?
I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to say it's a challenge, but, you know,
Worth having
capacity or requirement, possible requirements of any of these things that the state has the power to affect. I mean, we exist in a city that has a strong charter sector, which I think is a good thing, providing resources for kids. But, you know, the state can't say you're going to provide X necessarily. You're going to have X measure of teacher evaluation. That's not
So again, what exactly the?
I'm not sure it's a challenge.
So, you'll get a chance to. I'm making an idea about, you can't fire your way to a good teacher. You literally have to go and train them, because most of us are.
Challenge is purely the discretion of the
Most of us are. But you can mentor your way to a good teacher. But firing is just to get them training them all over again. And then, that is the process of trying to get to a good teacher. And I don't know how that fits in here.
But I think what you're getting at is
Are there programs, other professional development programs through ECPS?
it's not necessarily a good thing, bad thing.
That are like
So,
I mean, we-
depends on who you're talking to. And are they effective professional development programs is another issue.
Okay.
So,
So the first
You
level,
can't have a charter
are there programs that are required?
Well, and also, like, I think to the extent, like, things that we could request, we probably get their answers to. How much funding are we? Granted, that, like, that's step one. Step two is that
is there funding available for professional development for teachers, either at the local school or at the LEA? Is there money available?
Like, professional, like, classes, coaching, mentorship.
Professional development.
Like, how much are they putting into their human capital besides just the hiring?
Right.
we're on that same page.
And I've been doing that some working over their budget sometimes to be professional development. But is it systemic? Is it long range? Is it reoccurring?
Or like, how much of it is like truly helping? Because that's almost what you want. If you have a teacher who's not really good at teaching, I don't know, visual, like they're not like visual learners. They're getting targeted better teach visual. Right? That's their problem. That's their problem. I don't know how you know whether principals are making that match other than like looking at the general effect.
And remember back to when they were doing the three forms of technology, they had people that took over a year or 2 years coming and telling teachers who've been there 15, 20 years with how to teach because they were using technology, but didn't necessarily have that. Those kids that may be visual learners, or those kids who are auditory learners, those kids who need to move around the room on a frequent basis because they just like sit still, but they can still retain if they are given the opportunity to bring movement to the lesson. So, also affect those professional development skills like
I don't mind doing good work with kids and not making as much as I but like my opinion is just
So I do town hall meetings all the time. What they're thinking about education and what they need to do about it. And most of us feel that they don't know how to approach it. And so they kind of like, you go handle it.
Because you're the expert. And I'm afraid to let you know what I don't know.
Well, not even afraid to let you know what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Well, exactly. That's what I mean. I don't know what I don't know.
So they're really expecting schools to handle issues with them. And I know there's a program in Florida where they actually have parent mentors help others advocate for others. I haven't seen that structure here. So
So I think what I'm hearing you say is like, first is that
Well, you know, something to look at and see where because if I I'd love to hear what OSSE's priorities and challenges are.
I would say leadership platform is all continual improvement from like every role in my school is this big, not flowing. And, you know, it's not. Yeah. Yeah.
And I also feel about the data people too. If it is all about data, do you have people in your
Oh, well,
system?
I mean, if you wanted to just look at that shortage and all of that, like, yeah, there is no pipeline or training or, the turnover is high and there's no school for education.
I mean, like, I read this up here and like, this is sort of one of my most recent gripes. Like, I don't know how to sort of frame it here, but like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm pretty used to most of things. But what has changed recently is like, I feel like not only am I under a microscope, but I'm like, and none of our work, like, as leaders, I think that consistent sort of public shaming of those that work in students has a huge impact on the morale of myself and my team and our kids. And I'm not sure people writing the articles or perpetuating the narratives really understand that, but like, how about we just put like public narrative of teachers? I mean, like, that is something we talk about.
Actually, our state board student advocate has talked about that. He feels the loop as he talks about some of the great things he feels are going on in the school, but the media has painted this very dismal, blemished picture. And they don't get any credit for some good things.
Yeah, and a lot of times those bad media stories are the result of really difficult choices.
Potential, I'm guessing, with compensation is other soft benefits that come with it.
Yeah, so you do have HR issues. All right, everyone, I'm gonna bring us back together just for a second to bring us into the next part of this conversation. Thank you all, educators. Okay, so we're gonna move into the next part of this conversation, and to do that, if you don't have dots yet, you're gonna get dots from either me or from Cindy over here who's handing out dots. You're each gonna get 2. It says 3. We're gonna do 2, and you're gonna do a gallery walk around the room, and you're gonna get to put a dot next to the 2 priorities that you find to be the most important, pressing, etc., that you would like to see us dig further into in the next part of this conversation. Okay, so silently gallery walk and then place your 2 dots. When you land these dots, you got that red. Unless the other side of the red.
We only got 2.
Doesn't matter.
I can't. What do you want to know? Like, we're not going to. Oh, vacancies. Yeah, vacancies on 2 months. Sorry.
Oh, that's what you mean. You don't know what they are. Yeah, I would imagine.
Once you've placed your dots, if you can make your way back to the region where you were standing for the last conversation, that would be helpful.
That was so many.
You have to do 2 data submissions and you get insights. Nothing's done broadly. Oh, that's good. That's the best.
And you get
So like I meant to make that comment, like I feel like these are only personal items.
Yeah, so what did you say? So there's a, so I told him about it.
Please go back to the groups where you were at before. We're going to watch for the second part of this.
But you know that public
Yeah, so what we're doing now in our groups, I've assigned your facilitator one area that has popped. We've tried to synthesize where all of the dots are. And we're going to do 2 things now with your assigned talent challenge for your group. One is to brainstorm the data or types of analyses you would need in order to tackle that priority or challenge. Do that first. After you've done that, then we're going to go into a conversation about the types of decisions that having this data would be able to inform when it comes to this priority. Yes. Okay?
So only the 2.
All right, so data and then decisions.
We're actually just working on this.
Just one, oh, the one that was the most. Okay.
So I guess like Laura's question. Is the challenge?
like you let me off. I'm gonna
Yeah, we'll take it.
Well, I
Demographics, demographics.
I may go home about trying to get yes, but like, so like, we're looking at so like, I remember hard to forget.
And we just have this, we still have cultural diversity. So, you know, all whites are not so, you know, most of the ethnicity.
Yeah, we could probably
So you have Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic.
So that I can't share.
With my mother, she's got the stage in Spanish. I went to
But the reason why is because like I'm hiring right now.
they spoke Catholic. And so it's really a difference with them. So just to say,
Well, so what do you call that? Sub?
the cultural differences. So,
Okay.
I agree with you, but how would you look at that in cursive? Is there another data element that you could think about? Because when you're using data, right, it's
Yeah,
like really high, is it like language diversity, or is there
we could put language diversity in there. Language diversity. When you think of language diversity, you should think of English language learners, artists, Hispanic,
Just asking, what's their primary language?
in a black home, the primary language is English, but yeah.
I'm wondering though, like if we can come up with, right, what the list is there like a section of the students that can describe some of the cultural
Single parent, extended family.
So like,
These are the best ones that are licensed or they feel or they
We don't know what's diversity. What are the different ranges of diversity? We would have to let them know what's the demographics.
Something that I'm hearing you say, Alex, is also just like a common definition for what.
I mean, if you're a first year teacher and the salary that you make, are you
is this a good list for right now?
Yeah.
And then when you say like, let's say, educator,
probably not as
Yeah.
so first let's talk about the word educator. What do we mean by that?
For me, that's anybody who comes in contact, any adult who comes in contact with a kid at the school.
When I talk about prep programs, I'm talking about all of them, right? So, like, how
So the educator may be the teacher, but could be the custodian, could be the principal. We did successful the PE teacher program, the library program, so they all part of
We do not have the authority to require licenses, so we have to find a different way to find the data. And I think for teacher data is getting this up, but we don't have the ability to do that.
Correct.
Nobody. The LEA can make the decision on how they hire.
But you guys have the authority.
No, it's a federal law.
It's a federal law, we cannot.
Have a teacher license.
Not in DC.
So.
What about readiness? Teacher readiness? Like, how do we measure the readiness of a teacher to enter the classroom? So beyond just the program they attended, what measures of readiness are utilized to determine the quality of teacher before they actually start teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good one. I totally agree with you putting that up there on what are the benchmarks we can use to define teacher readiness, but to me that comes to a larger concern as I think about hiring. What if I'm not hiring for the school that I happen to be at, which happens to have a very diverse population, which is an amazing opportunity for all of our students, but what if I was in a school that did not have that same student population? And my job was to hire and retain these amazing teachers, and I'm offering a lower salary because I have a lower budget, and I don't have this information, right? So to me, it's a much larger question if we're talking about not only equitable access. Let's say we hit a great common definition of high quality. There's nothing that exists that says, oh, you high quality teacher, too bad you got that job at that private school, guess what, you have to go here, right? There's no mechanism for enforcing distribution of teacher preference.
That's true, yeah.
The school could incentivize high quality teachers into high need schools.
I would hope so.
But the opposite side of it, though, is that a high quality teacher in one side of the city may not be high quality.
That's true.
No one's mentioned evaluation data yet. I'm curious why.
So I think that's.
I don't believe it.
I think it's politics.
I think it's just because we don't have a common instrument.
Yeah. And I don't think.
Most states don't.
I think an evaluation data of a teacher has to be comprehensive for it to be right. Like, I mean, I love DC, but it's not comprehensive data system.
Part of my hesitancy in mentioning it is just based on historical experience of recognizing that in many states, 98% of teachers are rated effective or highly effective, and to me, that's not a valid measure.
So it's not on your evaluation of it really exists to be broken. But would it be helpful if it wasn't broken? Because I can tell you our
Yeah, because they could be leaving one school and going to another school in the same district.
Right. Or they could be going to.
But there's no way to track that now. Yeah.
I think the other thing of like the data that we need was again, I think it's like, do we even understand what the teacher need is? It's like, have we looked at in 3 years? Have we looked at factor life with the projected number of inclusive student spaces? And let's see how many students, I know we haven't, but like, I think when people sort of like walk up, like I overheard people walk up and like look at teacher shortage, how do you know we don't have a teacher shortage? What data are you privy to that you come to that conclusion?
Well, again, for me, frankly,
we just don't have
it's like willful bias. So like, there's no way that's true.
And we talked about like hard to fill areas like special education. We didn't really talk about because I don't even know whether it's by grade level. Are there particular shortages? Like, is it hard to find what you have to understand?
Or why can't you guys cross the river and teach there? Like if they came across the river, they're not going to be teaching for very long. Like, doesn't mean they're not a great teacher, but they're a great teacher in their context. And just because you're a great teacher in that context doesn't mean you just walk into another school.
Does this capture that, Laura? Like, who should get hired in for what schools? Like, is that, and then how can we refine our recruitment? Have teachers ever, even if they're not fully staffed.
And do we think the teachers like that ultimate teachers are not that
It's still mainly the principal level that this learning is going down.
Yes.
Even if we have a big HR machine trying to push things, it's still,
Okay, how to find recruitment to get great teachers for the schools and then inform the principal's decision. Is that okay?
Teacher preparation programs and their business, and like, how can you, if you're a higher, this would be a decision not necessarily possible. Like, I would want a teacher preparation program to be like, are there competencies and skills and knowledge that would serve students.
Oh, the most challenging students have the most teacher
How
power.
are we going to facilitate that at changing curriculum?
Very bad for the most time.
Well, it's also very bad for
places
that
our teachers will
programs are also like negative stories about how
if we're going to a certain location to attract more experienced teachers, are we also getting the bang for the buck? Can we actually measure that and say like we should keep or should we look at those? And I'm thinking also for the bilingual and dual language programs, you know, when you're looking for Mandarin Chinese dual language teachers for both, like there's a limited supply, so can we maybe even help inform where that's
This is what we're trying to do.
Funding decisions?
So baseball, first of all, if you have higher qualified, higher figures, and more longevity, the funding that it costs for a teacher with 10 or more years is going to be higher than a funding for a teacher that only has 1 year. So I have to rethink how I'm going to allocate funds unless, because funding may come to my building for the building facility, but not per teacher, and I don't know how that's going to happen. So the funding might be, I can only afford one teacher, but I can afford 10. Let's put a teacher so I can have a small class.
So there's less paying teachers, you know, there's also teachers who have the least experience. So we're back to where we were before, that the least experienced teachers dealing with.
But this may be on a systemic decision as opposed to a local school decision. So that the school system itself may say, we're not going to count funding per teacher based on their thing, but the number of teachers you need and you'll reallocate funding.
And I don't think a lot of times
I think that's like what you're speaking to actually falls under the category of what we're which is around educator effectiveness and it's really
you know she's not trying to get my blood pressure up.
I will say like what it is that they're not other places nationally, or imagine a report that came out that says that DC has a very diverse workforce, but it's not even close to the diversity of the students. And that's because the ratio of student diversity to teacher diversity. It may not be exactly the same, but is it close? So what would you expect to happen as a result of recruitment, training? And who would be the ones, like, kind of overseeing that? Like, who do you see as the trainers? So DC Public Schools used to have a good offices that I'm going to.
They do.
They still do. Okay.
And some of the larger ones has a recruiter. DC Prep has a recruiter.
No, DC Public Schools.
Yes, and like yes, all the larger LEAs have recruiters.
Yeah. I remember being sent to Shore to recruit teachers. Yeah. Some of these things would say that. The larger ones. Let's go back to another thing that's
I mean, my big data brain is like, it's all about programmatic funding. If you had on hand by September 1st, the entire HR, if you knew where every teacher was at every school, how many, September 1.
No, you're not gonna know in June.
Well,
By the end of the year.
well, okay, fine, right, but I'm just like, if you knew that, and if you saw that like, there was a 98% black school that had 54% white or white teachers, it was like 20% last year, now it's 54%. You might be like, damn, the city doesn't publish new diversity training. Right? Like, if you knew that, then you would be, you could like, the city itself could be like, this diversity. You do it on Saturday. Or if like, if there was a school who had a lot of turnover and has like, 40% of the new teachers are all first and second year teachers, but right next door is another elementary school that's highly effective and has a lot of experienced teachers. But what I mean is like that they would create like some sort of like mentor, like if they're right next door, like a mentorship program, like incentivize a mentorship program between those two schools. Right? And like if you had all that data on your hands, you could make more strategic programmatic funding decisions.
Like when I was in DCPS, Spin-On needed one class of advanced placement, but for one class they couldn't hire a teacher. So Eastern had a teacher that had a slot that was open. So between Eastern and Spin-On, they shared the salary. So he had AP classes here, and then so they shared the teacher.
Right? Or if you knew that like a school that was like right on the border, say, that like 80% of the teachers are in Montgomery County, PG County, you're damn well know that you're probably going to need a lot more on-hand substitute teachers on like in the winter on days of rain. Like if you just had that all that information, if we had all of this information accessible, you could run algorithms that would help you understand how strategic funding decisions.
Anything else? We have about another minute, so just make sure that I captured it. What else?
So what he just said with class coverage, with substitutes, with funding. So you got to be able to make sure that you have funding available, because I don't know if schools run out of funds for substitutes.
They could, it's possible. You're right. So you might prop up some schools funding for substitutes if you knew that.
I thought it just came from the budget.
I mean, it does, but like it does trickle down to some degree to like your tracks and like you've got to get your teachers to do all that. There'd be incentives and pressures to do it. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't do it.
Right.
When they see that their allocation. Right, and so that would be an indicator of like that there isn't a culture among staff.
Right. Yeah.
All right, everybody, we're gonna wrap up, come back to State People with us for a minute.
In Montgomery, I know, right?
Thank you. Oh, is it? Because not.
It was bigger. Thank you. Thanks to you.
Has it been a headache?
Yes.
Where's the phone? Okay. Awesome.
So thank you all so much. I was able to circulate a little bit outside of my group and heard incredibly engaging and active conversations. So thank you for participating in that. Just as a reminder for what comes next here, so we are still in the middle of phase 2. We are still in the middle of talking to different stakeholder groups and doing similar activities with other folks. In phase 3 of this work, we are going to take what we have here and what we've learned in other conversations, take what we learned in phase 1 about the data that's currently collected, and do a little bit of a mapping exercise. So of the data that you said would be needed to answer or address some of these priorities, what is currently available, what is not, what is just not feasible at all. And we're gonna try to come up with some reasonable recommendations, and then go back to some of the governance agencies that we started with. So go back to OSSE and PCSB and SBOE and DME and have a conversation about what might be possible in terms of working together as a city to address some of these priorities that you identified tonight. So that's all I have. I'm gonna hand it over to whoever. Here you go.
us about 2 minutes about your background?
2 minutes
Why
about my
you here?
background. Hi, my name is Beverly Lucas, and I am Director of Continuing Education at the University of the District of Columbia Community College. I was recommended for this task force by Diane Pavich of the Workforce Investment Council. I just started working with her because I'm new in my position. My background is in higher education, administration, and being a college professor. Currently, this is all very interesting to me because I'm working on my PhD. This is my first semester, so everything is about data, data, data. How do you phrase this question, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just really, really excited to be here.
Welcome. All right, so it is now 7:30 and we're supposed to adjourn in 5 minutes, and we will do so on time, but we're not breaking out into our committees tonight because this ran so long, we decided not to do that. That does not mean that at the next meeting, you don't come back prepared with your homework that you were given in the September meeting, and Matt will send that information back out to you so you come next month prepared to break out into your section. Any questions? Comment? Good night, everybody.